IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. Kumi Kapoor is a well-known journalist who has been writing on the inner workings of the corridors of power for many, many years. Her last book, The Emergency, A Personal History, chronicled the lives of her own family and of others during the internal emergency from 1975 to 1977. Her new book is about Parsis, or more specifically, the icons of the community, ranging from Jamshedji Jijiboy, the tycoon of the 19th century, to Nasli Wadia, to Freddie Mercury, whose real name, as we all know, was Farrokh Bulsara. Kumi is our guest today on the Wire Talks, where we speak to her about how she went about writing and researching the book and the choices and selections she made. Kumi, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you so much for calling me for your program. Pleasure.
You're a Parsi yourself. So did that dictate the choice of your subject? Were you wanting to write for a long time? Did you feel that you have a special insight into the community?
Just before I got this offer from a publisher that why don't you write a book on the Parsis, I myself was thinking on the same lines because I had gone to holy places after a very long time, not since my childhood, to Udwada, Navsari, Surat, Sanjan. And I was ashamed that I didn't know a lot about my community because, my father was in government service. And so I wasn't steeped that much in my Parsi roots as I should have been. So once the offer came, I started researching at my own pace. But it was such fun because I found out so many things I didn't know about. And by fortuitous or whatever coincidence, just about the time I was starting the book, the famous Tata Mystery battle started in 2016. And I thought that's such an interesting story. And it really deserves to be included in a big way because the families involved, including Mr. Nasli Wadia, they are the pioneers in Bombay, both either in industry or in the building trade. And it's interesting to know their roots. And I don't think the economic papers, they focused on the day-to-day battle of figures. But it's a much bigger story and it's a human interest story. So I wove that in and then I decided, in a book like this, it's not an encyclopedia of famous names. People keep saying, why did you leave out this person? Why did you leave out? But the one person I feel very, very bad that I have left out, and it's a total mistake, and I want to compensate if there's ever another edition of this book, is Adi Marasban. He was very much there, but in the publisher's changing chapters, is such a colorful character and so important to the history of the Parsi. He got left out. I don't know how. I have no excuse for that. And he should definitely be included.
So actually you preempted a later question of mine because Adi Marasban is an icon, totally different from the others because he was a journalist, he did theater, he was a humorist, and that's such an integral part. But I'll come to that in a little while in some more detail because, of course, we knew him and his contributions are immense. Yes, so you did that. And in the Nasli Wadia, Cyrus Mistry, Nasli Wadia was, of course, fully involved, but he was not a protagonist in the sense of Cyrus Mistry.
Actually, to interrupt, he says he wasn't involved from the beginning.
No.
He just took Cyrus' side.
Yeah, but if you, and I'm sure you heard it in those days, but I was up front talking to people, including Mistry and a few others. There was so much internal talk in the upper echelons of the community where everyone knew each other's connections, everyone knew each other's motivations going back years. Parsi snobbery at its height and Parsi internal workings of the community at the, I would call them the aristocratic level, immense. So that flavor does come through, but that I think if you could in the next edition expand a little bit, that would really go a long way because you obviously know a lot. Anyway, coming to my next one, you begin with quite a detailed background of your family and your forebears and how you were taught your traditions and how to practice them. You just mentioned just now that for years you really didn't pursue that line. But did you continue those traditions and when you went abroad to study and when you married?
I didn't really, the customs, in fact, even as children, I didn't observe much apart from going to the fire temple. I still know my basic prayers, and when I'm in trouble, I shouldn't, or when I feel that somebody else is in trouble, I do say them to myself. But apart from that, I think actually the real essence of Zoroastrian religion is about truth and righteousness and being good to people. The rest is all ritual, which has been introduced later by priests over the years. Because as you know, the Zoroastrian religion, all our records were destroyed in Alexander's fire in Persepolis. So it's come over the years to us through oral tradition and then written down much, much later. So a lot of that has been written by priests. I'm not sure that it's the original teachings of Zoroaster at all, who was a philosopher and not just, a godman.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's ironical in a sense that one of your forefathers was a priest. And
not one, or from my mother's side, everybody.
And highly respected, and not only in their, wherever they were from, but also in Pune, in Bombay. So your father's side is a little more professional from what I gather.
Yes.
But how did it all pan out when you and your sister too married non-Parsis? And how did the family, the relatives, and the wider community take to that?
Well, you see, the person who really bore the brunt was my sister, because she was wanted to get married, announced she wanted to get married when my grandfather, who, if you read the book, will know, was a very conservative Orthodox Parsi from Pune, and he was totally broken. And it was very, very difficult. My parents were pragmatic people, and they knew that times had changed. But so, I mean, when I got married, they didn't come there. Basically, I got married by the Indians, what is it called? Marriage Act, non-religious. Though I had a small ceremony later from my husband's side. But I was accepted by my parents, by my relatives. I go to the fire temple if the need arises, because I feel I'm still a Parsi.
And obviously you face no opposition, but you mentioned that when several things changed, there was once your children and your other children from other marriages were not allowed inside when there was a funeral.
No, they're still not allowed, because the Parsis are very clear that anyone who's not born a Parsi, and they do not recognize the children of women who marry out as Parsis, they're not allowed traditionally. Even that has changed. With larger and larger number of Parsi women marrying out. According to a Parsiana article, I don't know if it's true, there were 37% of Parsi women marry out of the community. A lot of them want their children to be brought up as Parsis, because usually religion is passed on, and traditions and culture is passed on through the mother's side. So I believe there are a lot of people who do so and let their children also enter the fire temple. My sister didn't want it done because my mother was very conscious of the fact that, she was from a priest family, that the children were not Parsis and should not come into the fire temple. So at her funeral, we felt it was the right thing, that they shouldn't come. Respect the feelings of people.
Obviously, they've not also had their Navjots.
No, they haven't had their nowadays.
No, but that is changing definitely, and overseas it is definitely changing.
Definitely.
But it's a problem in a practical sense because the men's children are allowed. If a Parsi man marries a non-Parsi woman, their children are allowed. Also, secondly, that is maybe contributing to the decline in population because you can add a few.
Yes, it's a big cause in India for the decline in population. The fact that you don't expect, don't accept the children of Parsi women who marry out. And there's this big program which is done with much fanfare along with the Minorities Commission called Geo Parsi to help Parsis to propagate. But I don't know how much you get out of that. Well, you certainly get a much larger population if you simply pass this one long needed reform in the community.
No, the Geo-Parsi thing is very, very controversial for other things also because of its stereotyping of roles and things like that. But that definitely would contribute. And of course, conversion is absolutely forbidden. So again, while abroad, there are people I've heard of cases in Russia where people have converted. So anyway, so keeping that aside, let's come to the book. So these icons, some of them, it's interesting that many of them many of the bigger families especially, but also the others got their leg up. They were boosted because of their proximity to the British. And of course, they were enlightened and they invested in education, etc., plus invested in industry, trade and all that. But that has had a ripple effect down the generation. And that comes through in the book that they were known to be, and you know that stereotype of the Apro Queen on the photograph on the wall. But do you think that was the sole factor in the success of many of them?
At least the book tries to bring out two things. That you cannot attribute Parsis' enormous success compared to the minuscule population simply to two factors. One, people say Sali is the China trade, opium trade, that is really. And the other is their kowtowing to the British. I don't think those were the main factors at all. I think the biggest reasons that the Parsis have done so well in India is because they were not constrained by the taboos of Hindu society or by the caste system. So they were able to intermix and mingle much earlier. When the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch came, these people were happy to seize all the opportunities. They were happy for trade. They were happy to mix. They were happy to let their women be emancipated. So that played a big role. And the other big role is that the Parsis were the first into education, certainly in Western India. And they started schools, colleges. You can just see the figures. I mean, they're mentioned in my book. There's no comparison. So I would say the real reason why the Parsis did so well in the 19th century compared to others is the fact that they took full use of the opportunities offered by education and industry, which I think other Indians were slower to do. And let us also get it clear that, of course, a lot of them were very loyal to the Raj. I think like all migrant communities, you're loyal to the people of the day. Today, people grumble that, Parsis are too status quo and, respectful of the government in power. But the fact is, that is a tendency. But you cannot fault the Parsis because there have been, as my book points out, a lot of rebels, a lot of people who defied the establishment of the day, whether it was during the British times, with Madam Kama being one of the Khushru Nariman, Dadabhai Naoroji, Rosha Mehta, whether it is during emergency, if you recall, that the first acts of resistance to the emergency were both by Parsis, if you look at it. First, Nani Palkhiwala immediately returned his brief of Indira Gandhi, which he was fighting on her election case, immediately. And that was a very courageous act to do because, it affected not just him. He was associated with the House of Tata. And secondly, Mr. Fali Nariman, he was additional Solicitor General, immediately sent in his resignation. So you can't say that Parsis don't do it. And one of my chapters brings out the story of Kobat Gandhi, how much he has gone through for what he believed in. So you can't dub all Parsis as status quo at all. I think in terms of their number, they've produced a lot of people who have stood up courageously for what they believe in. There is an ethical side to the community.
No. Well, Saklatwala is a very, very interesting example. And there's now, I think, a book on him. And in the Bombay scheme of things, there's Dincha Wacha. These were people, and of course, Nariman, who fought against the British for the reclamation of Bombay. So there are, I agree. But speaking of the opium trade, the fact of the matter is, and this rarely comes out, but if you research it a bit thoroughly, the list of opium traders includes Muslims, Khoja Muslims, other Muslims, Konkani Muslims. It includes Hindus. It includes Jews and even some minority of Christians. Many of them were full participants. Secondly, it's always been a curious thing when the opium was brought into Bombay or Calcutta for that matter. Of course, Calcutta was run by the company. But when it was brought into Bombay, or rather the British Crown, when it was brought into Bombay, where was it stored? It was stored by Gujaratis because there are still kind of stories about, certain areas marked for bhang or, other things. So I think this stereotype needs further investigation. So, but yes, and immediately after the opium trade, they did invest in industry, which really made a lot of difference in terms of capital growth.
Well, I'm not a historian. So, I speak with what little knowledge while researching the book. There's one thing that sticks out. One reason why the Parsi name is associated particularly with the opium trade is because they were far more enterprising than others. If Calcutta, you see the opium trade, it was simply handing it over to the British people. And they had their own outlets in China. The Parsis took it all the way. They opened offices in China. And Parsis just didn't do opium. Jamsetji Jijiba, he was such a remarkable man. He is the one who saw that the way the Chinese are embroidering and weaving, and he said, I'll utilize that. And nobody seems to remember today that the Tan Choi is really introduced by Jamsetji Jijiba because he brought it back to, he sent some people over there to learn the art of Tan Choi, and they came back and spread it in this country.
There are families named Choi and Chinoy. These were people who actually went to China, yes.
But the Choi here, according to Shanaz Kama, who studied the subject, she says the Tan Choi, the Tan is from 3 in Gujarati, and the Choi is probably the name not of the family, Parsi family from India, which I think is the Jokhi brothers, who went to China to learn the trade, but from possibly the Choi, the Chinaman who had the name Choi.
Okay. Well, Shanaz Kama knows more than all of us.
Yes, together, all of us, definitely on the subject.
So one should not contest. Now, there's a lot of documentation available on most of them. The Tatas, Jamsetji Jijiboy, Freddie Mercury, even Dadabhai Naoroji. A lot of information is available. Did you turn up anything really new or insightful? How did you kind of think that, what was your approach to say that, these guys are pretty well known. There's a lot of writing on them. What do I get out of, what do I turn up that's so special?
Well, I think one thing I realized quite early in the day, that all the biographies are generally hagiographies. They're so awestruck by their subjects that they only write about one subject. And I think to get the true character of a person, it doesn't have to be negative, but you have to bring out all aspects. For example, my first 4 chapters actually, they're devoted to the whole history of the Tatas, the Wadias, the mysteries, and of course the fights for control of the company, India's largest company, India's most respected company. But the point is, people didn't have the whole story, the color of these characters, the whole tapestry of the firm, what their relations with each other. I think that was a lot of it is new. Some of it, I don't think some business journalists were quite surprised, but some of the information I came up with, they did not know. For one thing, how exactly the mysteries got hold of the Tata share, or similarly, how the law was changed during Mr. Vajpayee's time. Then again, with Madam Kama, what do we remember of her? We remember what is written in history books, and history books only want to give one aspect, which is that she unfurled the flag in Germany. But thanks to Nawaz Modi, a very respected scholar from the Parsi community, one comes to know a whole different side. There she was, the biggest supporter of Savarkar. She supported him strongly. She subsidized him. She was willing to take the blame for him in the Nasik conspiracy case. So all that is brushed under the carpet. Parsis prefer to talk only about Dadabhai Naoroji, not about Madam Kama so much. And as you read about each of them, it's a very colorful history, a lot of which is ignored in trying to just give too laudatory a picture. Everybody's human. That makes them more lovable.
So who was the most difficult to research?
I spent the most time, as I said, on the entire Tata matter. And it was not difficult, I must say. I thought, I cannot do this unless I speak to all the three principals concerned. And I was lucky. It took some time, but I must say, whether it was because I was a Parsi or whatever, they were very fair and generous, and all of them spoke to me freely. And I must say about my community, I was so struck that since I am a Delhi journalist and used to politicians keeping you waiting, this and that, all of them with all the old-fashioned courtesies and politenesses that, Parsis do have.
You do quote Nasli.
Yes.
I don't know whether you actually quoted directly the other two.
Yes, directly,
in
all three.
Yes. But they were candid about the whole thing.
The two of them were candid, Nasli and Mistry, Cyrus Mistry. I didn't want to take, it was to take too many liberties with Mr. Wadia. With Mr. Tata, Ratan Tata, because I was conscious that it was very gracious of him to meet me. So to be frank, I didn't ask him too many leading questions. At that point, he said, well, the matter is in court. So he didn't really discuss the nitty-gritty of the allegations, and I didn't ask him too much.
I felt, and of course, I'm a lay reader, but this thing you must have heard, why choose only the stars? Is it to because they are glamorous and in the news and people are interested, or is it also because, who do you get who's not known or something like that?
Well, first and foremost, I focused on the Tatas because they are India's leading company, the ones which have set the standards for ethics, excellence, diversity. So their history is, apart from the Parsis, it's very important for business people also to know more about them. And the Tatas are inextricably linked with the whole Parsi community. After all, the firm was founded by the descendants of a priest from Navsari. And even now, Tata's Sons, the holding company, is owned entirely by Parsis. There's only one share to a non-Parsi. And so the idea of this quintessentially Parsi firm, which has done so much, not for the Parsi community, but for India as such, should slip out of the hands of the Parsis is a little sad, I felt. And I felt it needed to be focused on.
Actually, they've had two, when you say slip out, I mean a new chairman.
I don't, in a professional firm, there's always going to be somebody coming in. It doesn't have to be a Parsi. I was talking more of the trusts.
Yeah.
I think the founders of the firm would have expected the trust to remain in Parsi hands. There are a lot of outstanding Parsis with good ethical records, excellent in business, who should have been there.
Yeah. At least in one case, I know he took the diplomatic way out to say he'll send a signal to other people whom I'm friends with. So I don't want to be part of it. But be that as it may, I think Sons continues to be in the hands of the Parsis, Tata Sons, which is of
No,
course.
the Sons is controlled entirely by the trusts. And if you look at the members of the trusts, I don't think most are Parsis today.
No, they're not. And that could be falling populations could be one of the reasons.
Yeah, that's true. In fact, Mr. Tata told me that he said that if you look in terms of population, the Parsi representation is much more than it should be the national.
No. I'm sure they've dealt with all these questions a lot, and they don't come easy. But now, the next chairman, that's going to be or the next.
The chairman will be a professional. It doesn't have to be a Parsi.
No, but who becomes the head of trusts and everything, it's going to be.
Yes. I think one of the things Mr. Mistry was fighting, which I sympathize with, is there has to be some structure in place of governance. I don't think it's actually clear what happens over there in the trusts.
Yeah. But who was the most difficult in the sense of course, these are contemporary names, but historically, who caused you a lot of kind of stress and made you go deeper and deeper and deeper into it? Was there anyone?
No, the last person I got hold of was Nasli Wadia. But when I tried through so-called friends of his who assured me they'd get an interview, all failed. But when I just approached directly and said, well, we have a friend in common, and he had said we should meet someday, which was the late Nanaji Deshmukh. And I said, look, I have a whole chapter of the Wadias and I'm waiting for you. And he's often out of India. So he said, sure. I mean, I was so taken aback by the reply on the phone. I said, but when are you going to be in India? So his faithful secretary said, madam, I can only pass on messages. So then one day she says, come. I said, I'll come. I'll fly down immediately. But I'm coming all this way. I don't want a small interview. I have so many questions to ask and so much background to do. So any case, I flew down to Bombay and I said, let's see how it goes. These tycoons are very whimsical. Nothing may come of it. I told my cousin, I'll meet you for lunch or let's see. She said, no, give it a proper try and see. And I must say, Mr. Wadia made up for the wait. He talked and talked and talked so openly and so freely that finally both he and I had to rush for our place because there was no time left after that to do anything else.
Okay, so that really made a difference.
That made a big difference. I must thank him.
And in the past, a historic figure, anyone who was very difficult to research?
I did less research on the past than the present. I also tried to focus my book on people who had something new to offer. I didn't pay much attention to Dadabhai Naoroji, for example, because so much has been written about him. Jamshedji Jijebo, because so much has been written about him. I tried to make it a readable book, bringing in facts which aren't known and stories, because after all, we both are journalists. So we have to give it interesting pegs.
No, I could sense the journalist's hand in that thing because
it's not a historical book alone. It weaves in history. It weaves in history because the Parsi history is a very interesting subject, but I didn't want it to be dry.
And personal stories, the lives of the main people, protagonists, a little bit of not exactly gossip, but a little bit of things that are entertaining and give a dimension to that person's this.
As somebody who writes what is sometimes derogatorily called a gossip column, I want to say, what is gossip? If it's truth, it can't be gossip. Gossip is when it's supposition. I don't think there's much supposition.
But
I've put facts which a dry writer won't include. But I think the purpose of a whole book, especially even if you're doing a history of a community, is to make it interesting for the reader, not to be put aside for later.
In fact, humor, dryness, remind me of Adi Marzbana. This was my question. You say you've got a chapter on him, and
not a chapter. You see, I was doing a whole section on the Parsi press and all the institutions connected. The Ripon Club, the Time and Talents Club, they were so quintessentially, added to the culture. You are a Bombay boy, so you know that of that time. But it was badly done in the last chapter, which was then cut in two. My family's part was put in the beginning of the book as the preface, and the history of the community and the religion was at the end. And somehow, in all this, to make it comprehensive, this got left out. Adi Marzban got left out, and he was such a colorful character. And not that he was a colorful character alone, he was the editor of the Jame Jamshed for years. The Jame Jamshed was the most conservative. It is the only Parsi newspaper on that time in a daily basis, coming to every Parsi home. My mother used to read it as the Bible. But it was a very conservative newspaper. But he himself was not at all a conservative man. According to the present editor, she said she had heard that he never wore a sadra even. And his jokes and he had time to bring out a newspaper. He had time to bring out his plays regularly. And those Parsi plays, which I think he wrote also to a great extent, they are the basis on which the Hindi film industry was really started.
Correct. In fact...
so it's a terrible, terrible omission.
No, and in fact, when you mention newspapers...
It has to be rectified.
When you mention newspapers, of course, Mumbai Samachar has completed 200 years.
Yes.
And the Kamas, of course, are, in the background now. Manchirji, I think, recently
he passed away. Such a fund of anecdotes he was for me. Really.
Yeah.
So
you did meet him.
Of course, I met him.
Yeah, so the papers... are important.
But I just to get it right, it's the Marzban family which founded the Bombay Samachar. They fell into debt, and it was the Kamas, early traders with China and elsewhere, who took over because they couldn't pay their debts. Similarly, the Marzbans were running the Jame Jamshed. They were a family which was into journalism in a big way.
Yeah, and in fact, there's another paper also, Rastkofar.
Yes, Dadabhai Naoroji.
Dadabhai Naoroji's paper. Then, of course, the institutions, including, let's say, the Panchayat, including the Ripon, including the Time and Talents, the great Time and Talents.
I feel very nostalgic about the Time and Talents because my mother, every day, her ticketing committee would come to the house and sit making tickets.
Yes.
One concert or the other.
Yes, but those were very earnest, highbrow concert, but they inadvertently sponsored the police band, the rock band.
And that I've just been given this book of Veer Sanghvi to review his biography, and he gives a hilarious account of it. Of how these ladies assumed that they were, organizing a band for police band of some sort. And they actually had got one of the most coveted rock bands in the world just because the lead, singer was in India and said, yes, I'll give a concert. And Doordarshan recommended that if you want to sponsor a concert in India, why don't you go to the Time and Talents Club?
Yeah, the Time and Talents, of course, the Victory Stall is shut down long ago.
Yes.
They've also become a bit thanda.
You see, there are three institutions in Bombay. Ironically, all of them controlled by Parsis for Western classical music. There's the National Center for Performing Arts for the Tatars. There's the Meli Mehta Foundation, and there's the Time and Talents Club.
Yeah. No. There's the contributions, culture, newspapers, institutions would have been fantastic. But we hope it'll be in the next book.
Not next book. I hope if there's a reprint. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So you feel that is critical to lend another dimension to the whole thing.
Yes. I do.
So, of course, this book is aimed at not just the community, but by people not in the community, but lay people who may know a little bit. Somebody just posted on Facebook to say, I didn't know all this. Now she's a Delhi woman, and she said, I'm down a rabbit hole inquiring more and more. They also were early investors in Hindi cinema and theaters.
Yes. No, they started it in my chapter on the Wadias. I have brought that out, that though the first speaking film was by a Bengali, you'll know the name, but basically the Parsis were the head, and they were also the financiers, and even the mystery family. Very few people seem to know that Mughal Azam was because the script writer pushed off to Pakistan and didn't pay his debt, and so the mystery family got the script. And pursued the matter.
Yeah, that's plus of course their involvement in opening the cinemas and the first Hindi sound film, Alamara.
Yes, first Hindi sound. But the Wadia, that was there. But the Wadia brothers, J.H. and Homi Wadia, they did a whole lot. They have a whole lot of firsts in the film world to their credit.
Yeah.
And this, they started the studio
and brought in Fearless Nadia.
Yes.
So, any reactions from the Parsis, those who you wrote about and others?
Actually, the reaction, I wouldn't dare approach the industrialists, except one lady industrialist just this morning said she was enjoying the book, but I had mixed up the names of the family a bit.
Oh.
But otherwise I've got a very good reaction, even from the Parsis, which I didn't expect. I mean, a lot of my friends in Delhi said they were riveted by the book and they didn't know much about Parsis. But what really thrilled me was that Khojeste Mistri's wife, who's considered a scholar and a very part of the conservative section of the community, wrote me a very kind letter appreciating
That's an understatement.
I don't know, because she wrote me a lovely letter saying I was fair.
Okay, good. No, well, she's a Pakistan Parsi, and she's in the kind of really scholarly, refined, well-read persons.
Yes, so I was very thrilled to receive that.
And open-minded.
Mr. Nariman also, Fali sent me a very kind letter saying there were many things he didn't know about.
Oh, very good. That's a compliment. No,
I thought the bigger compliment was his son, Justice Rohinton, who wrote the foreword, because he is an encyclopedia on the religion and the community. And he said, there's things I didn't know.
Oh, that's excellent. So you have already mentioned that there will be a kind of updated version.
I hope. It depends on the sales, really.
No. I'm sure there will be, at least if you should push for that a little bit.
Yes, because even, the Poonawalla bit, it closed in March.
Yeah.
And there's a lot happening on the vaccine front after that. So some update is required.
Yeah. And also the generational difference in terms of approach to things and all that in the Poonawallas, because Cyrus was very, very low-key in general, media-wise and all. And Adar is pretty upfront, as is his
but
cousin.
Adar is the CEO, but the old man remains the chairman, and he was the founder.
Yeah. So now the Poonawalla actually, personally, I think really have contributed a lot. I mean, they moved from horse vaccine to this now. It needs to be updated. And that's the problem. Many of these stories continuously evolve and all that kind of thing. So where do you stop?
But basically, I did get, I had the vaccine up till March. But after that, the shortage, etc., one couldn't include it.
Yeah, so let's hope. Any other books on the horizon, or has this drained you?
No, I just finished. I need a break.
Yeah, no. I think a memoir might really work, personal memoir.
I'm not important enough to have a memoir.
Well, I must tell you, you were mentioning about what people didn't know. I'm not a Parsi, but I'm a Bombay person and familiar with them. I think the city would be, and the world would be a poorer place without their contribution, without their humor, and without the flavor they add. I think food deserves a lot more coverage, Parsi food. And,
there are a lot of books on Parsi food.
I know.
Restaurants at that.
I know they are. And sometimes very important to tell people the distinction between Iranis, Zoroastrians and Parsis, very, very different. But I think you fleetingly mentioned that the Iranis came barely a century ago. And these people... one of the other interesting lines that gets drawn is, when did your family come to Bombay? Now, that's really, quite a stark.
It was Burgess Desai, I think, who pointed that out in one of his books, that you can trace generally who's more aristocratic by when, because naturally, when they came to Bombay.
Yeah, actually, I must tell you that Burgess Desai's book lends a different flavor. His books lend a different flavor. Yours is altogether about the heroes, in a manner of speaking. But his is, it adds color. And he is, you can play games. Who is he mentioning?
Yeah.
And even I cracked a few names.
I did put in one in my book without mentioning the name. I wonder how many people outside the Parsi community will get who it is.
Yeah, but that's, of course, going to be very, very difficult for anybody.
Not very, very difficult.
No?
If you are in that milieu, yeah.
I have to read it more carefully. Burgess, I called him...
It is Effie Dinshaw's illegitimate offspring.
Did you get it from?
Of course, I knew who it was, and I had heard it.
I know that part. When I read it, I immediately called Burgess and said, Burgess, I know exactly who you're referring to. But it's a startling bit of information. It's really, really, when you think about it, it's really, really startling about who and what and how and all that kind of thing. So the Dinshas, of course, low profile, but owners of land and everything and so much more, and financiers. So anyway, I saw that Lady Wadia was also mentioned in our good deeds. May there be more books like this from you, Kumi. I think you've done a great service to us who know about the community but don't know about all this. So thank you for joining the Wire Talks.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah. That was Kumi Kapoor, author of a new book on the Parsis and the Parsi icons. We'll be back next week with yet another edition of the Wire Talks next week. You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hey, everybody, let me tell you a little bit about what happened on the IVM Podcast Network this week. If you are a fan of the network, you should definitely check out Naan Curry. Sadaf and Archit were joined by Keshav Chaturvedi of the Tere Mere Raste podcast. They talk about travel and food and, how important food is when you're considering travel. It's a really, really interesting conversation. Do check that out. Let me give you another couple of quick hits to check out. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet talks to Ashim Mathur from Dolby. On Smarter with Sid, Siddharth examines how Netflix is getting into e-commerce. Check out Misconduct with Raghavi and Nisha to learn about some of India's most famous criminals. And don't forget, do follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram to keep up with what's going on the network. And finally, I'd like to thank the sponsors of the network this week. They are what makes this possible. Thank you so much, Seat, Cred, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit, and Lenovo. We really do appreciate the support.
From uncensored and unfiltered chats with the who's who of the entertainment industry, I, Siddharth Kannan, bring you a very hardcore chat show called Candid Kannan. Tune in every Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.